You know, we usually see the news as this chaotic jumble of separate stories. But what if we paused and just looked at a single day? Let's take August 22nd, 2025, and treat it like one single snapshot of our world. Today, we're going to connect the dots and see how it's all, well, connected.
And on this one day, you can feel the world is just humming with tension. I'm talking about everything from a devastating humanitarian crisis and stalled peace talks, all the way to huge economic signals and new alliances taking shape. It really is the perfect snapshot of our incredibly interconnected and honestly, very fragile world. And I know what you're thinking, right? That sounds like a weird question. How on earth could a devastating crisis in the Middle East have anything to do with a speech given by the head of the U.S. Federal Reserve in Wyoming? Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack. It's all about the ripple effects.
So let's start where it matters most, on the front lines of a heartbreaking human story. On this day, a devastating declaration was made in Gaza, where a massive humanitarian emergency is happening right now.
Just look at this number, 514,000. That's the official number of people facing famine in Gaza City alone, according to the UN-backed food security experts. That's over 500,000 human beings, and that number is only expected to climb. It's just a staggering scale of suffering.
And if you want to understand why this is happening, you have to listen to what the major aid groups on the ground are saying. Organizations like Oxfam and Mercy Corps, well, they're not mincing words at all. They point directly to restrictions on aid as the key reason for this crisis, and they're sounding the alarm at the highest possible levels.
And this slide right here perfectly captures the information battle that's going on. On one side, you have the Israeli government saying there is no famine. But on the other, you have the aid agencies on the ground painting a completely different and absolutely devastating picture. It is a stark contrast that really defines this conflict.
Okay, so now let's pull the camera back from that crisis on the ground and take a look at the global chessboard. Because while that famine is unfolding, world leaders are making moves, trying to cut deals, and staring down some serious deadlines.
And what you see is just a world of these high-stakes standoffs. You know, in Ukraine, direct peace talks are completely off the table, even as NATO is doubling down on its support. And at the very same time, this huge deadline is looming for Iran to get on board with a new nuclear deal or else face even more sanctions. The pressure is absolutely on.
Now, here's what's so fascinating. That August 31st deadline, it didn't just appear out of nowhere. This timeline shows that it's the result of decades of history, all the way from early U.S. help to the 2015 deal falling apart, and now direct military clashes. You can feel the weight of all that history in this one moment.
Meanwhile, while a lot of Western diplomacy seems stuck, a totally different kind of gathering is taking place. Over in Tianjin, China's leader, Xi Jinping, is hosting a major summit for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, also known as the SCO.
And just look who's at the table. The leaders of China, Russia, and India, just to name a few. And their agenda? It's not about Ukraine or the Iran deal. It's about building deeper ties among themselves on things like security and the economy. This summit is a really clear signal that we're in a multipolar world, where new centers of power are taking shape. Okay, so we've got a humanitarian crisis, and we've got intense diplomatic maneuvering. Now let's talk about the economic current running underneath it all. And that story, believe it or not, takes us to a quiet conference room in Wyoming. This is the Jackson Hole Symposium. It's not just any conference. For the world of global finance, this is a huge deal. And it's here that the chairman of the U.S. Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, gave a speech hinting that interest rate cuts might be on the way. And let me tell you, in a world this on edge, words like that carry an enormous amount of weight.
And boom, you can see the impact right away. The Dow, the S&P 500, the NASDAQ, they all shot up. It just goes to show how sensitive the global markets are to any sign of good news from the world's most powerful central bank. It was like a global sigh of relief, sending a wave of optimism through a very tense economy.
But is this a sure thing? While traders in the futures market seem to think so. Before the speech, they were already putting the odds of a rate cut in September at about 70%. So it's not a guarantee, no, but it is a really strong signal that investors are betting the Fed is going to step in to keep the economy steady. All right, we have the pieces on the board. The famine, the diplomatic showdowns, and that huge economic signal. So now, let's put it all together and finally answer that question we started with.
This table just lays it all out. On the exact same day, you have famine and war.
That creates massive geopolitical instability and threatens key supply chains. Think about oil concerns, for example. That instability then puts a ton of pressure on the global economy, which is why a central banker in Jackson Hole has to think so carefully about his next move. And all the while, new power blocks like the SCO are forming specifically in response to all this instability. See? It all connects.
And that is the key takeaway here. These aren't just separate stories happening at the same time. They're all ripples in the same pond. A decision made in one part of the world has real consequences for people thousands of miles away. The price of gas, the availability of food, it's all part of one giant interconnected web. So is a famine in Gaza connected to a speech in Jackson Hole? The answer is absolutely yes.
So that leaves us with this final thought. In a system that is wound this tightly together, any single event, a diplomatic failure, a natural disaster, a market panic, can send shockwaves through the entire system. The real question for all of us is, where does the next one begin?